was pretty broadly just what the role of Honi Soit is. So I'll leave it open to you guys. What do you think the role of Honi Soit is? And we'll start with E.
Okay, cool. So what we think the role of Honi Soit is quite closely tied to our brand. So for those of you guys who haven't heard it, the reason that we decided to be evil is because it comes from the original Honi Soit motto, which translates to evil being to he or she who thinks. And we think that all the way since 1929, Honi's had a really rich and subversive history, and that means that Honi's role is to provide distinctly a student voice, and it's also to hold the SRC to account, which is why we do intend to keep politics an important part of Honi Soit, because we think Honi are the ones who are able to report on that stuff in a way that like a mainstream paper isn't going to. We wouldn't be prepared to say publish something that was not written by a student, because we think those people have other outlets.
Okay. And sex?
I guess everyone knows the kind of pictures from both tickets at this point, so I think it's best for us to speak to the differences that we think between the tickets in terms of the role of Honi Soit. We think that Honi also has a somewhat of a radical, subversive role in being a student publication that doesn't have to answer to the gag of a Murdoch-like figure, but rather usually quite a radical president of the SRC. And in saying that, I would point to a few differences. I think that our ticket has openly stated that we're more willing to be politically diverse. I think that is something that is probably fitting with the more radical, subversive role of Honi Soit, that we are more likely to show more opinions. We think that there can be radical opinions from the far libertarian right, just as there can be radical opinions from the far socialist left, and we would want both of those opinions in our paper. The other thing is we would want to take that radicalism to a more diverse array of subjects, I think. So we want to take that radicalism to things like sport, for instance. We don't think that sport is something mundane or trivial. We think that when in 2013, 98% of sports coverage on free-to-air television is of men's sport and 2% is of women's sport, there is a role for Honi to question that and to engage in meaningful sports coverage that can be radical and can ask different questions to say the questions that the Daily Telegraph can ask.
Okay, quite a few of those themes have been debated already, especially on social media. I'll give people a chance to respond to those a bit later because we're going to talk about some of those things specifically. But first, to each team, just another broad question to bring us into it. What is the one thing that absolutely must change in next year, that must be done differently? And I'll start with sex this time.
Yeah, I think what sex envisages for next year's paper is diversity more than anything else. And diversity includes being political, not partisan, but also including a wide range of content, because at the moment every student pays a fee to the paper, but not every student gets something out of it. And I think that we owe it to the student population to actually give them something that everyone can pick up and engage with. And that's what sex is pushing for, having diversity of content, diversity of views, diversity of opinions.
So are you saying less of a focus on just on politics and to a broader range of subjects, or do you mean diversity in terms of who's contributing?
I think both.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
Okay. Honi next year, in two simple words, needs to be more accessible, and it needs to be more visible to the student body. It is true that our SAF money goes to every student politician on campus, and well, not everyone, but every elected paid office bearer. And the student money goes into writing the paper. So it's crucial that Honi Soit, the SRC paper, keeps student political acts to account. So it needs to be political on that level. But as editors, it isn't our job to make sure every single possible viewpoint amongst the student body is canvassed. It's our role to make sure every view that wants to find expression in Honi Soit does. It's our role to make sure that the collectives are consulted, that every student who wants their voice heard knows how they can make it heard, and knows that they can come to the editorial team and work with the editorial team to put together their student paper. It would be a misuse of students' money to, as an editorial team, decree that students want to read one topic or another. It would be a mistake to tick every box along the political spectrum and say, yes, we've got a libertarian right viewpoint this week and a socialist left viewpoint. What the editorial team needs to do is make sure Honi is open so that if a libertarian writist wants an article, that libertarian writist knows that they're welcome to come and write that.
Ed, just to follow up, the original question was the one thing that absolutely must change next year. Accessibility? Okay.
Okay, so both tickets have talked about the role of Honi Soit. The next question that we want to talk about is who the intended audience of Honi Soit is. So Sex have said that they want a broader diversity of content, and I'm guessing that also means they want to reach a diversity of students. Is your intended audience every single student at Sydney University, or who are you targeting for this? And I guess tied into that, what is your focus going to be? So we want you to talk about, I guess, the role of the sports section, which has dropped off a bit this year, and also the place of politics in the student paper. So we'll start with Eve.
Okay, well, first of all, we're not going to try and cater to the 33,000 kids in the undergraduate student body, because that is impossible. But what we would say is that it is better to have a paper that tries to adhere to those people who want to be involved in it and encourages people to be involved in it, than to have a paper where maybe a broader range of students can read one or two articles that are in their interest, but doesn't have an entirely cohesive paper that does what its role is. And that comes back to what we were saying about how we think that Honi does have a role to be political. Insofar as you guys wanted to talk about things like covering sport, our issue was not with covering sport. The way that policy was presented in lecture batches up until very recently was just sport. If you want to talk about homophobia in sport and you want to talk about sexism in sport, that is not sport. Those are elements of culture that we are totally happy to cater for, and we don't need to cater for with a particular section that says sport, because that is dictating the interests of the student body. We're not going to say the market that we're going to dictate to, but what we're going to do is going to make it open, is we're going to try and make the paper as open as possible to the people who want to contribute.
Felix, Astha?
Sure. Just quickly on those accusations first. We do not intend to dictate students' interests, but allow for all students' interests. To the extent that Subeta said she wanted to cover student politics, that's dictating an interest to students. We think that students are interested in student politics, we continue to cover that. We think students are interested in sport, we continue to cover that. That's not dictating interest, that's us talking to hundreds of people over the last 2 weeks, and people want sport in their newspaper, and we would give that to them. But I think this is a problem when Subeta says we'll engage people who want to be involved in the paper. The problem is not enough people know about Honi Soit now and know how to engage with it right now. So what you're doing is continuing an insular group of people who are currently engaged with the paper rather than attracting new people to Honi Soit, which is what we want to do next year. We think that considering every student pays staff, every student pays university fees to have 4,000, 5,000 copies of Honi published every week, they deserve to have that paper that speaks to their interests.
I might just stick with sport for a minute, because it's become quite an interesting area of debate between the two teams, because it hits on a much bigger question, which is what is the role of a student paper versus the broader world of media. Actually, we've got a question from Joey Stefan on this. And it's, who identified as a sex supporter. So it was pitched to Evil, so I'll ask you guys first and then I'll give Sex a chance to respond. It is. On the question of bias, Ed McMahon has said the only way Honi can be balanced is by presenting a counter-narrative to the corporate media, thereby balancing the viewpoints within the broad church of the Australian media. Will this belief require you to exclude views that reflect political positions that are dramatically opposed to your own?
Right. It's not the only way Honi can be balanced, but it's the primary way that it is balanced. Honi gives expression to the student voice, but we've got to remember here that the audience, it's an SRC paper. The audience isn't anybody who chooses to rock up to university. The SRC is visible. People know where to find the SRC. There's collectives littered over the campus. There's activist happenings going on all year. People know the SRC is here. There's Honi on every major building corner. If people want to be involved with the SRC, they can be. And Honi as a paper caters to those who actively engage in the SRC and become a part of the SRC and its culture of political activism. Part of that culture is denouncing views that are canvassed in a binary sense. Good and bad. Both people bad, sport good. Probably a bit controversial to use sport there. But we deny those binaries. Evil is about diversity, and it's about subverting popular narratives and denouncing those binaries. In the Australian media, those binaries prevail. So we certainly never find ourselves excluding viewpoints, unless, of course, they were homophobic, bigoted, sexist, racist, or the like. We will exclude articles if they're like that. It might seem authoritarian, but it's not our call. We'll take direction from the SRC collectives, from the Queer Collective, the Women's Collective, and if they're not comfortable with an article because of its sexist nature, we don't publish it. But apart from that, We don't exclude articles.
Can I just ask, when you're saying that you'll take directives from the collectives, can you be a bit more specific? Do you mean actually running your content by them every week? Do you mean having them the whole paper?
No. We don't run our content by them every week. Our editorial team is comprised of people who are thoroughly involved in the collectives and have been for some time. If there is an article that clearly is flagged as potentially inflammatory, it's something that would be sent to the collectives and sort of we'd say, what do you think? But often you find with articles that are homophobic or sexist or racist or whatever they are, they're going to be illegal anyway. They'll be defamatory or they'll be somehow excluded.
Just back over the sex. The original question was about Honi's role in the broader media context. What is its place in Australian media and what does being in that place mean?
Okay, well, am I allowed to respond to everything?
Yeah, sorry, of course.
Okay. Well, and I think you have a bit of a paradox here. You're saying that the paper is an SRC paper and students who want to be involved should be involved, but students who don't want to be involved shouldn't be involved. And then you're also saying that you do want to have this position where you denounce binaries and you include all views. I don't think the two can actually exist together. I think if you're saying that you want all views, then you have to accept the fact that the SRC is not the only thing that dictates the Honi Soit, because Honi Soit may be run by the SRC, but it caters to all students on campus, and it always should strive to do that. The other thing that I also want to address is your question, Max, in terms of what's the role of Honi Soit in Australian media. I think it's quite obvious that we're in a very unique place here on campus. It is the student paper, it is Sydney University's student paper, and that's what really defines what Honi Soit is. So when we say that we want to have diversity of views and we want to have Australian media, we want to place Honi Soit in Australian media, we obviously emphasise student views, student writing, student opinions. That's the unique aspect of Honi Soit, and that's what we want to do justice to in terms of providing each student to have a voice in the paper. So
if students are writing on topics that are already quite well covered in the mainstream media, I mean, we had the example of asylum seekers before, very well canvassed in the mainstream Australian media. Are those kind of pieces on those kind of topics going to make it in your paper if they're written by students?
If there was a unique angle of it. Obviously, we're not going to syndicate Herald columns on asylum seekers or write asylum seekers bad in our paper. We would aim to cover issues that the Australian media covers in a different light, hopefully from a unique perspective. Can I quickly ask Ed a question on what he just said before? Sorry. Which is, if you guys don't mind, thank you. Which is, you said that you wouldn't exclude articles based on the political views espoused by those articles. But equally, your idea of balance seems to rely on publishing far more left-wing articles, in that you would like to counterbalance the influence of the Australian and the Telegraph. Can those two aims exist at once, or are they in tension?
They can. I'm just responding to this directly. That's right, isn't it? Cool. They can. This notion of balance that I've advanced is based on my years of involvement with activist collectives in the SRC and my knowledge that the SRC and the views of students who use the SRC as a vehicle of expression are, as a general rule, left-wing. So it's not that we're setting out to create a left-wing narrative. It's that we're setting out to engage students, the students that choose to engage themselves with the political happenings of the SRC. And in so doing, you generally end up with left-wing content. It's not that we're setting out to artificially create that. It's just that tends to be the result.
It seems like when you approach the paper from that angle of only encouraging, or not only encouraging, but expecting only left-wing views to come forward, that the right probably wouldn't want to write for that paper?
Okay, I'm going to step in here. First of all, because I think the fact that you targeted that question at Ed and even the reason for this entire debate is slightly problematic in terms of the way that Honi works, in that there are going to be 10 editors who are elected. And our ticket does have diversity, contrary to what you guys have been saying. Insofar as Ed is involved in particular collectives and might be more left-wing, at the same time we have 4 people who haven't been involved in any political factions during their time. We think that those voices balance it out. But also, there is no such thing as your tagline of political but not partisan. When you view balance, Felix, you view balance as a white, privileged male. And so I think that we've been quite clear from the beginning about what our stance is, about what the political editorial team. They are like more left-wing than we would be, but also they have still managed to publish other articles. They have still managed to publish other articles in the course of the strikes, but that do showcase right-wing opinions. And that's because the credibility of a left-wing opinion is obviously compromised when you can't publish it in the same paper as a right-wing opinion. So in order for our voice to be credible, we would have an interest in encouraging right-wing writers to contribute.
Okay, so equal to six.
I think we might just give Felix a chance to respond to that.
Yeah. Subeta, I find it extremely ignorant for you to pigeonhole our ticket as a white privileged male when currently I'm sitting here in front of you as a
I think we're going to move on from that one.
No, I don't think you can say that Felix represents the views of all the members of our ticket. And just as you pointed out, that people on your ticket are diverse and can present a view of a diverse range of views, I think we can do the same in that we all bring our own experiences to the ticket and our vision to the paper. I think that's just...
If we can, guys, we'll try and keep it on policies and ideas, not on the individuals on each ticket, if that's possible.
Thank you. Okay, so your policy statement says that you would be political, not partisan, that you would cater 1,000 different opinions, but you'll be the champion if not. On your Facebook page, you said that you, as a ticket, supported marriage equality. Isn't this an example of when you should be a champion of an opinion?
I think the approach that we're taking to the paper is that we don't think that we have a claim, so that our views aren't necessarily the true opinions, that we would never claim to know the exact truth about a particular issue, and we couldn't ever brand the other side of an issue as entirely illegitimate and rob them of their voice in the paper. So what we would do is aim to generate debate on those issues, accepting that our own perspectives could be flawed or imperfect. We are not so assured in our opinions as to block out the other side in those debates. So on marriage equality, we would have that debate in Honi Soit. Yeah.
Can I also respond to that? I think, Subeta, you said like a few minutes ago that
Hey guys.
that you don't think that diversity of views means that you should shut out right-wing views, and so you would be more than comfortable to include that. That's exactly what we mean by when we say we want to be political, not partisan.
Okay, so we all agree.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure we all agree.
Why is that?
I think there is disagreement between some people on your ticket and you on whether you would publish the right.
Guys, I think we're speculating on the internal views on each other's tickets, which we don't know. So we're going to move on. Yeah, let's move on to something. This question is from Hannah Smith, who is one of this year's women's officers, who is running for president on the Activate ticket. But it goes to, I think it goes to both tickets. Sex, you are campaigning on a platform of fewer SRC reports, and evil seems to be silent on the topic. I believe the weekly reports from the SRC office bearers are a way to ensure the SRC is accountable and transparent, and is one of the only mediums through which the SRC is directly visible to students. Can both sides clarify their position on this, on the importance of SRC pages and their plans for them?
Yeah. Our aim, if elected, is to reduce the 2 pages of SRC office bearer reports into 1 page. We do not discourage accountability of the SRC, and we'll publish 4 reports online every week for people who seek them out. We'd have a president's report every week, and then the other office bearer positions would cycle through. So, for instance, people like the General Secretary would get a bi-weekly report, the education officers would get a bi-weekly report. We don't think that's a particular problem when this year we've seen, David print the exact same article 2 weeks in a row. Sure, yeah, okay.
But also, just from the way the SRC reports operate, often at times you see the officers not actually doing their reports on time or finding it a struggle. Sorry, but it's the reality. And you guys can't really deny that. I'm sure you've experienced that as well. And I think this just streamlines the process and makes it a lot easier.
Just to follow up, it's interesting that you guys bring that up, because we found this year probably the most interesting reports have come from pretty consistently and on time as well, the Queer Collective and the Women's Collective. We feel that those ones have been the most relevant to probably readers and have made the biggest effort to talk to members. There is no mechanism in the Constitution that protects those reports. Can you tell us what would happen to those reports particularly? Would they be cycled? Would they be done completely?
We would ensure that they were cycled through. So all elected office bearers would get to have their reports in Honi Soit. I don't think it is worthwhile for the General Secretary to every week take up half a page with a report for the 12th time on the exact same details of the budget, when that coverage crowds out other issues that people are interested in reading about, that we can engage more people in the student paper that is theirs.
And the other thing I'd say is, is that I don't think we don't want reports to come in weekly. We absolutely do, and we absolutely will publish them online. If students are interested in reading it, they can access it, and that's why we're running on accessibility as well, so better online engagement. That's one of the things that we're really keen on doing.
Just to play devil's advocate, when David publishes the same report 2 weeks in a row, or Dylan covers the same material every week, so don't you think that's an example of when students can actually see the progress that maybe isn't being made in those positions and is keeping them accountable, and the fact that students don't have to go seek them out to find out that there hasn't actually been that much going on that week?
I'm not sure the benefit of students seeing the intense fallibility of their office bearers is worth crowding out other coverage.
We would want to compromise what we can actually do with the paper just because someone isn't efficient. Sorry.
I'm not sure people gain that much by reading the same report 3 weeks in a row and then having a reflective process about their General Secretary should have thought something different that week.
Yeah, look, we've stumbled across a fundamental point of disagreement. This is the crux of it in many ways. We disagree on what this paper is. Is it the paper of 33,000 undergrads, or is it the paper of the SRC? Astha suggested that it's the paper of everybody, and every conceivable view must be canvassed. It's like this troublemaker. And that every view must be canvassed. But if that's what Honi Soit is, what work is there left for the Bull to do? What is the Bull? The Bull is the USU magazine. That's what it does. Honi Soit does SRC, and it keeps SRC office bearers accountable. We have promised in our policy statement weekly autonomous columns. That's something we consult with the collectives with and say, do you want this? How do you want it to look? It's something that we can't promise as something that we're going to put in every week because it might not be something that autonomous collectives want to do. But it's something that we're going to make available to them. And as you said, queer reports this year have been remarkable. Women's reports, so important that marginalised communities on this campus, if it's the one week that they happen to pick up Honi Soit, that they can see, oh, there's a women's officer on this campus, or there's a queer officer, and this is where I can find them. And that point that you raised, Hannah, is precisely right. If David Pink is submitting the same report 2 weeks in a row, people know that David Pink isn't writing his reports because he has nothing to write them about. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but he's a very busy man.
You mentioned accountability. For Honi Soit, the SRC is one of the hardest areas of accountability because of its close relations with the SRC. It's far more difficult for Honi to criticise than, say, USU. Do you think that office bearers will keep... You said that it would increase accountability if they were publishing reports regularly. Do you think they're going to keep themselves accountable? They're going to put checks on themselves and have honest reflections in their pieces?
Well, no, they're going to try not to, but that's part of the incentive not to be lazy. If they know they have to write a report every week, they know they have to have something to write a report about. And the accountability mechanism isn't only Honi looking at the SRC and acting as a criticiser of the SRC, it's also showcasing the office bearers, the people like the President and Gen Sec, and showing to the student body, this is what we've been doing. And then come election time, voters and readers on Honi Soit can be more informed about what's being done by these elected office bearers throughout the course of the year.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, really quickly on that. I think that we don't disagree that the SRC should be kept accountable by a student publication. I think our disagreement is how best to keep it accountable. I don't think that people self-reporting on the progress that they have been doing in the SRC when they have their own political ambitions are unlikely to be totally honest about their own progress or how well they're performing in that job is the best way to keep them accountable. I think it is good, rigorous student politics coverage that members of our ticket have done in the past, that I did for you guys this year during the Union Board campaign that Lane did, that John Gooding has done, that actually keeps those office bearers properly accountable.
I also think that...
Hey, Astha, if it's alright, we've had you guys to speak first, so much up there.
Just quickly on that, so rigorous student politics sounds great. How will you prevent that from being barred if it's allegedly defamatory towards members of the office bearers team? That's something like we've had difficulty this year getting articles through as Honi Soit is owned and run through the SRC everything is through the president. So do you guys have any ideas of how you get stories that are keeping the SRC accountable through?
I think it's hard as long as the president gets to censor articles as he's done this year for Honi to keep the SRC fully accountable. We would aim to do that, but I can't think of any way apart from to separate the president from Honi, which we would try and hope that Council would approve that the president couldn't censor Honi. But considering that usually the president has quite a large amount of councillors, that's unfortunately related factional politics.
I think we'll throw it over just very quickly, guys.
I'll let Subeta answer the question, but I just really quickly want to say something. Felix has said that we can't rely on office bearers to be honest in every week's report. Well, if they're telling fibs in the report, we're quickly going to find out about it. When people lie, you find out about it. So if the lie's there in ink, it's a great way to hold them accountable. Hang on, you said this. You didn't do this. It's accountability. Subeta, do you want to answer that question about? Could we have a recap?
How are you going to get around? How are you going to report on the SRC when they effectively have censorship measures over you?
Well, I think that is equivalently a problem for both tickets, but I think we've been very clear about trying to keep the SRC accountable, and even the fact that we would continue to have the same number of reports, suggest that is more important to us.
Ed just mentioned the autonomous columns policy that ABLE has, and we have a question from an audience member on that, Andrew Bell, who is the second trainer. This one's for ABLE. Which marginalised voices are you going to include in your regular autonomous columns?
Okay, I'll respond to this. We're going to include the ones that have established collectives, and I think that this sort of responds to one of the policies that SEX has in terms of putting in place that people of colour own. We're not going to dictate to marginalised groups that they can have a particular edition. We think that the best way that these voices are heard is from a grassroots level when they develop their own collectives and then they ask for that. And so autonomous columns are just a way in which they can consistently have a voice instead of just having the 1 week that is queer only or the 1 week that isn't only.
Can I quickly say something on that? We're seeing today, a lot of people in the audience probably know Farhad, and he's put out the feelers to start a People of Colour collective on campus. So it may well be that we end up with a People of Colour autonomous column next year if such a collective comes into existence and wants such a column. But it's not something that you can do from above, from the throne of the Honi editorial board. It's something that has to come from the grassroots level, and it's something that this week has started to come from the grassroots level, and it's a really good development.
There's actually a second part to that Andrew Bell question, which is why is an autonomous column better than an autonomous edition? Now, one of SEX's policies is to have an autonomous People of Colour edition. Can you answer Andrew's question there? What's the difference? Why is your model better?
Yeah, okay. I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. I think that our Honi team advocates to having articles that do explore issues that affect people of colour regularly, but we also think it's equally important to actually dedicate one edition, just like for women's, to people of colour. And in terms of what Ed was saying about dictating to marginalised people, that's absolutely not what we've tried to do, and that's absolutely not the intention of the policy. A policy comes from an ideological belief, and that's the ideological belief that a couple of us who do identify as people of colour on this ticket thought and thought out as a policy. And when it comes to consultation with people, I think that consultation doesn't end with collectives. We certainly want to include collectives as part of the process, and that'll happen after and if we get elected. But we also want to go above and beyond that, and we have been doing that in the last 2 weeks when we've been campaigning to students, and we've got a really good response from anyone who we've spoken to who's been a person who identifies themselves as a person of colour, as an ethnic cultural person, or as a CALD identifying person. I don't think that when you say that, what's the difference between that and an autonomous edition, that one is better than the other. I think they should both exist, and that's what we're trying to achieve here.
I think we'll respond to that. The problem is that policy came from a few views of people who identify as people of colour. I personally don't like the idea of an autonomous edition that groups together all people of colour, and that is exactly the reason that you start off with collectives, because particularly when you're talking about race, we think that there are a plethora of different ways in which people identify with their racial oppression, and you can't just put them all together and dictate them from the views of two people on that ticket who identify as people of colour. And there have been people in Facebook debates like Farhad who we were talking about who was against the idea that this has happened without a collective being convened and simply through the Honi editorial team. It's not the way that queer Honi's happened, that the queer Honi came to be. It's not the way women's Honi came to be. It's not the way the Indigenous Honi came to be. We think those are the right mechanisms that respect these people's views.
I think there's a really simple answer to that, and that's that a collective like such doesn't exist at the moment, which is a big shame, but it's not our fault that someone hasn't actually formed a collective like that. And I think that what this policy has done is actually encourage something like that. I don't think we are shutting down collectives or arguing against the power of collectives to have this consultation. That's absolutely our aim, and it always will be. If we become editors, the first thing we'll do is go to the collective and discuss it with them. But the fact is that there wasn't a collective in place that we could consult. Hopefully there will be one. And if we do get elected, I don't think consultation ends at collectives either. I think collectives certainly dictate / influence this discussion, but I don't think you can say that consultation only ends at collectives.
I think we're going to move on from that now, guys.
Okay, we're moving on to the various conflicts that members of each ticket may have as Honi editors. So we've got a question from Nina Hallis, who's running with Eagle. She's a member of that ticket, and this is a question for Sex. Despite running on a platform of being student journalists, not student politicians, one of your ticket members, Astha, is the immediate past president of the USU. Astha, given your history of censoring Honi in the interests of the board, how do you propose to manage the conflict of interest between your fiduciary duties to the USU and a commitment to investigative journalism should you be elected?
Sure, okay. I think the answer to that is really simple. I've chosen to conflict myself out of any discussions that have to do with the USU. I do have responsibilities that I owe to the USU, and that's why I don't want to get involved in any discussions, decisions, editorial content, or reporting that have to do with the USU. I'm very capable of making that distinction myself.
What about the opposite? Would you be willing to provide editors with background information, possible information that's...
I think when I say I want to conflict out of it, I mean by both sides.
Don't want to be involved in any discussions?
Not at all.
But how will that work in practice? A lot of discussion, at least for our team, takes place like on our Facebook page, just casually in the office. It's not a formal meeting where you can like step out of the room and say, okay, now we're addressing this item of the agenda, things like that. So how will you actually in practice conflict yourself out?
Yeah, I think no one on my ticket is stupid. Like, everyone knows that I obviously have a conflict of interest. Like, they all are very well aware. I've spoken to all of them about my conflict of interest. We've had this discussion. I think when those discussions happen, we have to be very careful about the way we carry them out. And I will always make a conscious effort to recuse myself from any of that discussion.
Could I reply? I think that it's problematic that you personally have a history with intervening. So in 2012, when there was the article that was going to be published about the way the Union Board was lying about their funds. In that circumstance, as you were not meant to convene with the USU and you did provide information to them about that article being published that resulted in the USU threatening to sue the SRC. So in that circumstance, you have gone against what your duty was in that role. What is to say that you would?
Subeta, I think that's. I'm going to give Astha a brief chance to answer, then we're going to cut this one off.
Okay.
And we're going to have a question more time to Eagle.
I think you've got my role wrong in that I was a board of director who owed duties to the USU and not Honi Soit at the time. I was also a director of student publications, which means I wasn't an editor for Honi Soit. I was looking out for any content that was going to be defamatory or had legal consequences, and that's exactly what I did. But also, if that were to happen again, I would obviously make sure that I would conflict myself out, because now my duties would be owed to Honi Soit and the USU, and I think the very simple and most effective way of doing that is to conflict out completely.
Seeming as we've had one directed at a particular member of Sex, we've also got one that was about a particular evil campaigner. It was to Tim Sullivan. The question is, you've been speaking at various colleges claiming you'll do your best to limit or eliminate the kind of negative coverage that's been published in the Honi under the current editorial team. Given that you've positioned yourself as the most viable college candidate running on a ticket, how do you intend to reconcile this premise with your commitment to balanced and open investigative journalism? And I'll let...
Do you want me to answer that, given that I'm also a college student?
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
I think that's probably fair. Look, in many ways, this goes to the very heart of what the evil brand is about. Often, this is an example where balance has not necessarily existed in the student paper, because so often in the SRC, people point to colleges and say they're dens of iniquity, they're pure evil.
You're trying to make it true.
And the whole brand of evil is about looking beyond this binary of black and white, good and bad, and looking at the complexity therein. I, for one, don't think that I'm a misogynistic, racist so-and-so. I don't think I'm some kind of archetype of an evil college boy, yet I'm a product of college. I think we're best placed to see the complexity that exists in those places. And I don't think that gives rise to any real conflict for Tim. I think that perhaps there will be people, or there are people on our editorial team who are going to have a more black and white view of what college is. But there'll be people like Tim and I who say, well, okay, yeah, this particular incident was wrong, but it isn't all like that, you know, and that's our answer.
I'll give Sex a brief chance to respond. Colleges and Honi have always had an interesting relationship. Do you intend to write about colleges a lot? How do you...
We intend to write about colleges because we think that Honi Soit is probably the only publication in the country that can report on Sydney Uni colleges and the abuses that occur there almost every year. I think it's a huge problem. I think that question came from Beck Wong. And so I think that our commitment as not being from college, as owing nothing to those colleges, means that we can be fairer and more accurate about those abuses that occur at college. We think Honi has a huge role in reporting on those things.
How do you get an accurate insight into that?
Into college?
Yeah, how do you write about college?
I suppose this the same way that investigative journalists have written about everything that they haven't been involved in. Like all institutions that they
Just quickly, you guys have taken a significant amount of campaigners from the college base. You obviously have people who have a history in colleges as well, so I don't think that need to protect that is necessarily a flaw exclusive to our team.
Yeah, we might, with much hesitation. Oh, you want that one?
Yeah, just one last question for Sex. So you've advertised Judy Zhu as being your designer-in-chief. The SRC regulations only provide for 10 editors to be paid to have swipe card access to the SRC, and people without swipe card access aren't allowed into the SRC building after hours or on the weekends. So if you are going to win, are you going to try to get Judy recognised as an 11th editor and therefore get paid and get that swipe card access, or are you going to try to make all your design happen during the week?
We would... our position on Judy is that she would not be considered an 11th editor, but rather like the people involved in, say, cover art on Honi at the moment or design processes now. And I know that past editorial teams have involved people in both of those processes. Judy would be involved in that way.
Okay, so not the day-to-day laying out of the paper.
She would be involved in laying out the paper and doing cover design, but I think people have, external to the editorial team, done cover art for you guys this year.
So we view Judy as in a different role, not as an editor, but we see the space for someone to actually be allocated with the work that's pertaining to design and layout, and we think that she doesn't need to become an 11th editor to do that. We think that just like how you would source out photographers or artists to do work, that's how we would source out a designer, and that's what we see in Judy.
And Judy would just take on a regular important role for us. And we don't think that presentation or design is unimportant in Honi Soit. We think it's incredibly important how you present your paper in terms of who picks it up and the enjoyment they get out of it. So we think
we don't need an editor because all of us come from artistic backgrounds.
Yeah, great.
Can I also ask, does Judy get paid for her efforts, or is Judy just an exploited...
Guys, why not?
Are you there?
I didn't think I'm being exploited. I would have to sign up the ticket. So I also do think, if you are going to criticize that, I don't want to get so.
Okay, do we have any questions from the floor? We've got about 5 minutes left. Okay, Kitty, who's part of Grassroots.
Just as a quick factual sort of inaccuracy things, like in legislation sort of and things like that, your ticket is made up of student journalists, Eagle is made up of student politicians. Like, what do you really mean by that? Considering we should just having just as many politicians as the other as well as people who are indies, just because indies aren't officially affiliated with one fashion or other.
We might just make that, is there any difference between the tickets in terms of the journalistic and political background, the hack background and the writer background? Is that a difference between the tickets? Do you guys want to go, does either ticket want to go on the record now and saying that is a difference?
I would suggest that is a difference numerically, between the amount of people
How do you
involved.
tell who's active?
We have one kind of dormant member of a faction on our ticket.
Do you have it?
No, because we don't have a faction. Just because people.
Can I say, I think the emphasis wasn't on the other team having student politicians, even though 5 of their members are affiliated with political faction on campus. But besides that point, I think the point was that we do have more experience as student journalists in publications that we've written for and where we've been published, and also in terms of our ticket. When you talk about indies, I don't think that any of us really identify ourselves as indies, and I think you should give us the autonomy to make that decision for us.
Please let's have that now, please. We'll go over to, we'll give Evil a chance.
Okay, just the big smear campaign from you guys has been that we're full of people from grassroots. To be clear, we have 3 people who are part of grassroots, only one is an active active member, but also grassroots is as much like a political alignment as being part of the indies is, because grassroots is not aligning with the Greens, it's aligning with a particular ideology, which is exactly what like Voice and the indies have done. So if you want to count
This is just a follow-up to that, more on the writer background as opposed to the political background. And I guess it's mostly to Evil. Why did you have ticket members claim that they'd written for student publications when they hadn't in your campaign CVs?
Can you maybe just, I don't know the factual accuracy of that question, can you
Okay, there was...
Let's take on that. So it's in the CV, as they went through print, we had Wayne Sainty go and look at them, and one of the ticket members had stated that they'd written for Honi Soit in 2013 as a contributor. When asked for evidence on that fact by the R group, there was no evidence, and so that was removed from their CV.
So there was just the one instance?
The one instance.
Okay, I obviously don't know the specifications of that. Like, should that have happened, the fact that it is one very narrow instance of being a contributor shows that we don't have like a subversive reputation with it.
Hey, we'll just give it a chance to finish the question.
I think, practically speaking, what happened there is that a campaign manager or somebody assisting on the campaign has put that in on a false assumption, and it's been rightly picked up and removed. And I think that's fair enough. Mistakes happen, we're all infallible.
And feel free to identify other ones and we'll change it as well. Like, we don't intend to be dishonest.
Okay. I think we might wrap it up there. It's 5:02. No. Sorry, guys. We've had one question coming from each side. I think it's best we leave it there.
Okay.
Can we please give a big...
That's fine.
Can we please give a big thank you to the panelists?